In the small, peaceful town of Willow Creek, life moved at a gentle pace. Rolling hills stretched out as far as the eye could see, and thick forests surrounded the community, offering breathtaking views and endless opportunities for outdoor adventures. Nestled among these natural wonders was Sarah Thompson's home, a place she had worked tirelessly to afford. For years, Sarah juggled 2 jobs while raising her teenage son Ethan on her own. Buying this house wasn't just about having 4 walls and a roof. It represented freedom, stability, and a fresh start. The property came with plenty of space, including dense woods at the back that blended seamlessly into public hiking trails. The locals loved those trails. They were a staple of Willow Creek, used by families during weekends, joggers in the mornings, and dog walkers in the evenings. But there was something unusual about how people accessed them. Instead of entering through the designated trailhead, near the park entrance, many residents cut through Sarah's land using an informal path that snaked its way through her backyard. This shortcut had been around for decades, long before Sarah even knew the area existed. No one ever asked permission because no one thought they needed to. It was simply part of the neighborhood culture, an unspoken agreement passed down from one generation to the next. At first, Sarah didn't mind too much. She valued being part of a close-knit community, and letting people use the path seemed harmless enough. However, over time, things started to change. Strangers began showing up late at night, their flashlights bobbing between the trees as they trudged along the path. Trash accumulated along the edges of the trail. Empty soda cans, candy wrappers, and cigarette butts littered the ground. Worse still, Sarah noticed tire tracks where vehicles had driven off-road, damaging plants and leaving muddy ruts behind. Her once pristine patch of forest was slowly turning into a dumping ground. One evening, after coming home from work, Sarah stood at the edge of her property, staring at the worn dirt path. She sighed deeply, feeling torn. On one hand, she understood why people liked using the shortcut. It saved them time and effort. On the other hand, it was her land. Legally, morally, and emotionally, she had every right to decide what happened on it. After all, she paid taxes on this property, maintained it, and cared for it. Why should she have to tolerate strangers traipsing through whenever they pleased? Determined to find answers, Sarah visited the local zoning office the following week. She brought copies of her deed and maps of her property lines, asking if there were any easements or legal agreements allowing public access. To her relief, the officials confirmed that her land was entirely private. There were no recorded rights-of-way, no historical claims, nothing that obligated her to keep the path open. Armed with this knowledge, Sarah made a decision. She would build a fence across her property line to clearly mark where her land began and ended. It wasn't meant to be hostile. It was simply a way to reclaim control over her own backyard. With permits approved and contractors lined up, Sarah hired a team to construct a sturdy wooden fence. The structure wasn't extravagant, just simple planks nailed together, but it effectively blocked the path. A sign attached to the gate read, "Private property, no trespassing." Sarah hoped this would be enough to deter anyone from crossing without permission. What she didn't anticipate, however, was the storm of outrage that followed. Karen Miller, the self-appointed queen bee of Willow Creek, lived 2 streets over. As president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, Karen prided herself on maintaining order and preserving the neighborhood's charm. She often hosted events, organized fundraisers, and spearheaded initiatives aimed at improving quality of life for everyone. But beneath her polished exterior lay a fierce determination to get her way, and when it came to the hiking trail, Karen considered herself its guardian. For years, Karen had walked the path almost daily, sometimes alone, sometimes leading groups of friends or newcomers eager to explore the trails. She introduced it to new residents, encouraged families to use it, and even planned casual meetups there. In her mind, the trail wasn't just convenient, it was essential. It connected her to nature, to her neighbors, and to the sense of belonging she cherished so deeply. So when Sarah's fence appeared overnight, cutting off access completely, Karen felt personally attacked. On the morning after the fence went up, Karen marched straight to Sarah's house. She arrived with a clipboard, tucked under her arm, and a look of indignation plastered across her face. Standing beside the freshly painted wood, Karen planted her hands on her hips and called out, "Sarah, we need to talk." Sarah emerged from her front door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She already knew what this confrontation was about. "Good morning, Karen," she said cautiously. "What's going on?" "This," Karen exclaimed, gesturing wildly at the fence. "You can't do this. You've cut off access to the trail. Do you realize how important this is to the community?" "I understand your concerns," Sarah replied calmly, "but this is my property. I have every right to secure it." Karen scoffed, shaking her head. "Your right? What about our rights? People have been using this trail for years. You're ruining everything." As the argument escalated, more neighbors began gathering around, drawn by the commotion. Some sided with Karen, nodding in agreement as she spoke. Others remained silent, unsure of what to think. Sarah tried explaining the situation, the litter, the late-night intrusions, the lack of respect for her boundaries, but Karen refused to listen. To her, tradition outweighed ownership. And as far as Karen was concerned, Sarah's actions were not only selfish but also a direct threat to the harmony of Willow Creek. By the time Karen finally stormed off, vowing to fix this, Sarah realized she had stepped into a battle far bigger than she'd anticipated. Little did she know, Karen's reaction was only the beginning of a much larger conflict, one that would test her patience, resilience, and commitment to standing up for herself. The morning after Sarah installed the fence, the air in Willow Creek felt heavier than usual. The sun rose lazily over the hills, casting golden light on the dewy grass, but the peaceful ambiance was shattered by the sound of raised voices near Sarah's backyard. Karen Miller had arrived early, clipboard in hand, her expression a mix of disbelief and fury. She stood at the edge of Sarah's property, staring at the freshly constructed fence as if it were a personal affront to her very existence. "Sarah," Karen called out sharply, her voice cutting through the quiet morning like a knife. "We need to talk about this. This monstrosity you've put up." Sarah stepped outside, still wearing her slippers and holding a mug of coffee. She wasn't surprised to see Karen. She'd expected some kind of reaction, but the intensity of Karen's demeanor caught her off guard. "Good morning, Karen," Sarah said evenly, trying to keep her tone neutral. "What seems to be the issue?" "The issue?" Karen repeated, her voice rising an octave. She gestured dramatically at the fence. "This is the issue. You've blocked off access to the trail. How could you do something so selfish?" Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knew would be a difficult conversation. "Karen, I understand that people have been using the path for a long time, but it's on my property. I have every right to secure it." Karen shook her head vehemently, her perfectly styled hair bouncing with each movement. "Your right? What about our rights? This trail has been here for decades. It's part of the community. You're ruining everything." By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. Neighbors peered over hedges or lingered near their driveways, curious about the commotion. Some walked closer, forming a loose semicircle around Karen and Sarah. Among them was Mr. Peterson, an elderly man who often used the trail for his morning walks, and Lisa Chen, a young mother who pushed her toddler in a stroller while listening intently. Even Ethan, Sarah's teenage son, peeked out from behind the screen door, watching the scene unfold with growing unease. Sarah scanned the faces of the onlookers, feeling a mixture of frustration and determination. She turned back to Karen and spoke clearly, addressing not just her but everyone present. "I appreciate how much people value the trail, but let me explain why I made this decision. Lately, I've noticed litter piling up along the path. Trash, cigarette butts, even broken glass. Strangers have been coming through late at night, sometimes driving vehicles off-road and damaging the area. It's become unsafe and disrespectful. I'm not doing this to hurt anyone, I'm doing it to protect my property." Her words seemed to resonate with some of the neighbors. Lisa nodded thoughtfully, glancing at the ground as if imagining the Sarah described. Mr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recalling the occasional beer can he'd seen discarded near the trees, but Karen wasn't swayed. If anything, Sarah's explanation only fueled her anger. "That's nonsense. Karen snapped, throwing her hands in the air. You're exaggerating. Sure, there might be a little trash, but that doesn't justify cutting us off completely. This trail is vital to the community. It connects us to nature, to each other. You're being completely unreasonable. Sarah clenched her jaw, fighting to stay calm. Karen, I've checked with the zoning office. There are no easements or legal agreements allowing public access to this land. It's private property. I'm within my rights to build this fence. Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes. Rights, rights, rights. All I hear is me, me, me. What about the greater good? What about preserving what makes Willow Creek special? At this point, the crowd began murmuring among themselves. Some nodded in agreement with Karen, while others exchanged skeptical looks. One neighbor, Tom, a middle-aged man known for his dry sense of humor, leaned toward his wife and whispered, "Greater good? Sounds like Karen just wants to hike without walking the extra 100 yards to the park entrance." Despite the growing tension, Sarah refused to lose her composure. She planted her feet firmly on the ground and looked Karen straight in the eye. "I care about Willow Creek too, Karen, but caring about the community also means respecting boundaries. My decision isn't about excluding anyone. It's about taking responsibility for my own land." Karen bristled at this rebuttal. Her face flushed red as she jabbed a finger in Sarah's direction. "Respect? You call this respect? You're isolating yourself from the rest of us, Sarah. And mark my words, people will remember this when it comes time to vote on HOA matters." It was a thinly veiled threat, and Sarah recognized it immediately. The HOA held significant influence in Willow Creek, overseeing everything from landscaping standards to noise ordinances. Being on Karen's bad side could make life difficult, not just for Sarah but potentially for her neighbors as well. Still, Sarah refused to back down. She squared her shoulders and replied, "If respecting my property lines makes me unpopular, then so be it. I won't compromise on something this important." The standoff continued for several more minutes, with Karen hurling accusations and Sarah calmly defending her position. Eventually, Karen threw up her hands in exasperation and stormed off, muttering under her breath. As she retreated, she turned to the crowd and declared, "This isn't over, Sarah. Not by a long shot." Once Karen was gone, the remaining neighbors lingered awkwardly. A few offered sympathetic smiles to Sarah, while others avoided meeting her gaze altogether. Lisa approached tentatively, her stroller bumping softly against the gravel driveway. "I get where you're coming from," she said quietly. "But Karen's pretty determined. She won't let this go easily." Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know, but I can't live my life worrying about what Karen thinks. I have to do what's best for me and my family." As the crowd dispersed, Sarah returned inside, her heart pounding. She knew Karen wouldn't give up. Without a fight, and judging by the look in her eyes, the battle was only beginning. For now, though, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She gazed out the window at the fence, its wooden planks standing tall and unwavering. It symbolized more than just a physical barrier. It represented her resolve to stand firm, even in the face of adversity. Little did Sarah know, Karen's reaction would escalate far beyond angry words and passive-aggressive threats. Over the coming days, the situation would spiral into something far more dramatic and far more personal. In the days following her heated confrontation with Sarah, Karen Miller didn't waste any time. She transformed her outrage into action, launching a full-scale campaign to discredit Sarah and rally support for her cause. To Karen, this wasn't just about reclaiming access to the trail. It was personal now. Sarah's refusal to back down had wounded Karen's pride, and she intended to make sure everyone in Willow Creek knew exactly how unreasonable Sarah was being. The first salvo came in the form of flyers. Overnight, bright yellow sheets appeared, taped to lampposts, bulletin boards, and mailboxes throughout the neighborhood. The bold headline read, "Save Our Trails." Below it, in smaller text, was a passionate plea urging residents to oppose Sarah's selfish act. The flyer painted Sarah as someone who cared only about herself, accusing her of destroying nature, ruining community spirit, and disregarding decades of tradition. It even included a grainy photo of the fence, captioned with the words, This is what greed looks like. At first, many neighbors were swayed by Karen's messaging. After all, most people in Willow Creek loved the trails and cherished the idea of open spaces where families could connect with nature. They hadn't considered the legalities of the situation or stopped to think that the path might actually belong to someone else. For them, the fence felt like an unnecessary obstacle, a symbol of division rather than unity. Whispers spread at the grocery store, during school drop-offs, and over backyard fences. Some began openly criticizing Sarah, calling her stubborn and unneighborly. But Karen didn't stop there. Anonymous complaints started flooding the HOA inbox, targeting Sarah on every possible front. There were allegations of excessive noise from her property, despite the fact that Sarah rarely hosted gatherings, claims that her landscaping violated aesthetic guidelines, even though her yard was meticulously maintained, and accusations that her security cameras were invasive, though they pointed solely at her own fence. Each complaint was carefully crafted to chip away at Sarah's reputation, creating the impression that she was a problematic neighbor who disrupted the harmony of the community. Meanwhile, things took a darker turn. One morning, Sarah discovered that someone had vandalized her fence overnight. Sections of the wire mesh she'd installed to reinforce the structure had been cut, leaving gaping holes. Spray painted across one of the wooden planks was a crude message: "Tear it down." Sarah's stomach sank as she examined the damage. This wasn't just mischief, it was intimidation. She immediately called the police and filed a report. But deep down, she suspected who was behind it. While Karen hadn't directly admitted to orchestrating the vandalism, her fiery rhetoric at the recent confrontation had likely emboldened others to take matters into their own hands. Despite the mounting pressure, Sarah refused to let fear dictate her actions. She hired a professional security company to install additional cameras around her property, ensuring that future incidents would be captured on video. She also reached out to a local attorney, seeking advice on how to protect herself legally. Her lawyer helped draft a formal letter to the HOA, outlining Sarah's property rights and warning against further harassment. Armed with documentation and evidence, Sarah prepared to defend her position, not just against Karen, but against anyone else who tried to undermine her. Karen, however, was far from finished. At the next HOA meeting, she arrived armed with petitions, charts, and a PowerPoint presentation detailing why Sarah's fence needed to come down. She spoke passionately, framing the issue as a battle between progress and regression, between inclusivity and exclusion. "We're not asking for much," she declared, pacing dramatically in front of the room. "Just a little compromise. Surely we can find a solution that works for everyone." Her performance earned applause from some attendees, but not everyone was convinced. Lisa Chen, the young mother who had previously expressed sympathy for Sarah, raised her hand hesitantly. "I understand how important the trail is," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But isn't it Sarah's land? Doesn't she have the right to decide what happens on it?" Karen faltered for a moment, clearly caught off guard by the question. She recovered quickly, however, brushing off Lisa's concern with a wave of her hand. "Of course, property rights matter," Karen replied dismissively. "But so does community spirit. We're talking about something bigger here, something that affects all of us." The debate continued for hours, growing increasingly heated as opinions clashed. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the HOA board was divided. Some members sided with Karen, eager to appease her influence, while others recognized the validity of Sarah's stance. Ultimately, no formal decision was made, leaving the issue unresolved, for now. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Karen decided to escalate matters even further. She organized a public demonstration outside Sarah's house, inviting neighbors to join her in protesting the fence. On a crisp Saturday morning, a group of about 15 people gathered near Sarah's driveway, holding signs that read slogans like "Keep Willow Creek Open" and "Nature Belongs to Everyone." Karen led the charge, megaphone in hand, shouting, rallying cries that echoed through the quiet streets. Sarah watched the spectacle unfold from her living room window, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and disbelief. She wanted to confront them, to explain once again why the fence was necessary, but she knew better than to engage directly. Instead, she stayed indoors, keeping a close eye on the protesters through her security cameras. Ethan, her teenage son, hovered nearby, visibly upset by the commotion. "Why are they doing this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You're not doing anything wrong." "I know," Sarah replied softly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes, people don't react well when you stand up for yourself, but I promise we'll get through this." As the protest dragged on, tensions reached a boiling point. Karen, frustrated by Sarah's refusal to respond, decided to take matters into her own hands. Late that evening, under the cover of darkness, she attempted to climb over the fence herself, determined to prove that it was both inconvenient and dangerous. Unfortunately for her, the top of the fence was equipped with anti-climb spikes, a precaution Sarah had added after the vandalism incident. As Karen scaled the barrier, her foot slipped, sending her tumbling backward onto the ground. Though she escaped with only minor scrapes and bruises, the fall left her humiliated and furious. When news of the accident leaked, thanks to a neighbor who witnessed the scene and couldn't resist sharing it, public opinion began to shift. Videos surfaced online showing Karen sprawled on the grass, clutching her ankle and muttering angrily. Commenters mocked her clumsiness, questioning whether risking injury to bypass a private fence was really worth it. Others pointed out the hypocrisy of Karen's crusade, noting that if the trail was truly so vital, why hadn't the community formally established access rights years ago? For Sarah, the incident marked a turning point. While Karen's antics had initially alienated her from some neighbors, the absurdity of her behavior now worked against her. People began to see the situation more clearly, recognizing that Sarah wasn't the villain Karen had made her out to be. Slowly but surely, support for Karen's campaign began to wane, replaced by calls for compromise and mutual respect. Still, Sarah knew the fight wasn't over. Karen was too stubborn to admit defeat, and the legal battles looming on the horizon promised to be long and exhausting. But despite the challenges ahead, Sarah felt a renewed sense of determination. She had faced adversity before, and she knew she could handle whatever came next, as long as she stayed true to herself and her principles. The legal battle between Sarah and Karen quickly became the talk of Willow Creek. What had started as a neighborhood dispute over a hiking trail was now escalating into something far more serious, with both sides digging in their heels and refusing to back down. For Sarah, this wasn't just about protecting her property anymore. It was about standing up for herself against someone who seemed determined to bully her into submission. For Karen, it was about proving that tradition and community values mattered more than individual ownership. Sarah's first step was to hire a reputable attorney named Mr. Grayson, recommended by a friend who had dealt with similar property disputes. Mr. Grayson was calm, methodical, and known for his ability to navigate complex cases without losing sight of the human element. During their initial consultation, he listened carefully as Sarah explained the situation, from the informal path through her land to Karen's increasingly aggressive behavior. When she finished, Mr. Grayson leaned back in his chair and nodded, thoughtfully. "Legally, you're on solid ground," he said. "Your property rights are clear and there's no evidence of an easement or public access agreement. But Karen isn't going to make this easy. She's likely banking on wearing you down emotionally and financially." Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "I knew this wouldn't be simple, but I didn't think it would get so personal." "It happens more often than you'd think," Mr. Grayson replied gently. "When people feel entitled to something, whether it's land, resources, or even attention, they can become irrational. The key is to stay focused and let the law work for you." With Mr. Grayson's guidance, Sarah prepared for the fight ahead. Together, they drafted a formal letter to the HOA board, outlining her legal rights and demanding an end to the harassment. Copies of the letter were distributed to every member of the association, along with supporting documents like her deed, zoning permits, and photos of the vandalism. Sarah also shared her story on social media, posting updates and videos documenting the events leading up to the dispute. Her posts struck a chord with many readers, especially those who lived outside Willow Creek and had no stake in the drama. They flooded her comment section with messages of support, sharing their own experiences with difficult neighbors and offering words of encouragement. Karen, however, wasn't about to let Sarah win the public relations war. Determined to sway opinion in her favor, she doubled down on her efforts. She gave interviews to local news outlets, portraying herself as a champion of nature and community spirit, while painting Sarah as a cold-hearted outsider bent on destroying everything Willow Creek stood for. In one particularly dramatic segment, Karen stood near the fence, gesturing emphatically at the woods behind her. "This isn't just about a trail," she told the reporter. "It's about preserving our way of life. Sarah doesn't understand what this place means to us." But Karen's theatrics began to backfire almost immediately. Social media users dissected her arguments, pointing out inconsistencies and exaggerations. One commenter noted that Karen's claims of decades-old use didn't hold water if there was no official record of public access. Another highlighted how Karen's focus on the trail conveniently ignored the litter and late-night disturbances Sarah had cited as reasons for building the fence. Even some of Karen's former allies started questioning her motives, wondering aloud why she was so obsessed with a shortcut when there were perfectly good alternatives nearby. Things took another turn when footage surfaced showing Karen attempting to climb the fence and subsequently falling. The clip went viral overnight, spawning countless memes and jokes at her expense. While some viewers found humor in the situation, others saw it as proof that Karen's crusade had gone too far. Why risk injury to bypass a private fence? And why insist on using someone else's land when public trails were readily available? As public opinion shifted, pressure mounted on the HOA to address the issue fairly. Several members resigned in protest of Karen's leadership style, accusing her of prioritizing her personal vendetta over the well-being of the community. Others distanced themselves publicly, issuing statements urging calm and rational discussion. Even Tom, the neighbor with the dry sense of humor, quipped during a casual chat, "If Karen wants a trail so badly, maybe she should buy some land herself." Despite the growing backlash, Karen remained undeterred. Refusing to admit defeat, she filed a frivolous lawsuit against Sarah, alleging that the fence constituted a nuisance and demanding its removal. It was a desperate move, and everyone involved, including Karen's own lawyer, knew it. But for Karen, it was a last-ditch effort to assert control over a situation that had spiraled wildly out of her grasp. The courtroom proceedings dragged on for months, each session adding to the mounting stress and expenses for both parties. Sarah attended every hearing, flanked by Mr. Grayson, who skillfully dismantled Karen's arguments piece by piece. He presented irrefutable evidence of Sarah's property ownership, highlighted the lack of any legal basis for public access, and pointed out the hypocrisy of Karen's complaints. By contrast, Karen struggled to provide concrete proof of her claims. Her witnesses, mostly friends and acquaintances, offered vague testimonies about the trail's importance, but couldn't refute the fact that it ran through private land. Throughout the trial, Sarah remained composed, even when Karen made snide remarks or shot daggers at her with her eyes. She knew better than to rise to the bait. Instead, she focused on presenting her case clearly and respectfully. Outside the courtroom, she continued engaging with supporters online, thanking them for their encouragement and keeping them updated on the progress of the case. Her transparency earned her even more goodwill, further isolating Karen from public sympathy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge delivered his verdict. In a decisive ruling, he affirmed Sarah's right to build and maintain the fence, dismissing Karen's lawsuit entirely. The court found no evidence to support her claims of nuisance and ordered her to pay Sarah's legal fees, a crushing blow to Karen's pride and finances. As the gavel fell, Sarah exhaled deeply, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. It was over. She had won. Karen stormed out of the courtroom without saying a word, her face flushed with humiliation. Reporters tried to catch her reaction, but she brushed them off, climbing into her car and speeding away. Back in Willow Creek, news of the ruling spread quickly. Some residents celebrated openly, praising Sarah for standing her ground and calling for greater respect for property rights. Others quietly reflected on the ordeal, acknowledging that perhaps Karen's obsession with the trail had overshadowed the real issues at hand. For Sarah, the victory was bittersweet. While she was glad to have closure, she couldn't help but feel saddened by the toll the conflict had taken on the community. Relationships had been strained, trust had been broken, and the once peaceful atmosphere of Willow Creek had been disrupted. Still, she resolved to move forward positively, focusing on healing and rebuilding connections where possible. In the weeks that followed, Sarah hosted a small gathering in her backyard, inviting her immediate neighbors to join her for a barbecue. She served homemade burgers and lemonade, setting up chairs under the shade of a large oak tree. Though not everyone attended, those who did expressed gratitude for her efforts to mend fences, both literal and metaphorical. Lisa Chen brought her toddler, who giggled as Ethan showed him how to toss a frisbee. Mr. Peterson complimented Sarah on her garden, remarking that it looked lovely as always. Even Tom cracked a few jokes, lightening the mood and reminding everyone that laughter could heal old wounds. As the sun set over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the yard, Sarah felt a renewed sense of hope. The battle may have been exhausting, but it had taught her valuable lessons about resilience, communication, and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. And though the forest beyond her fence remained untouched, she finally felt at peace knowing her boundaries were respected for good. The aftermath of the legal battle left Sarah Thompson physically and emotionally drained, but also quietly triumphant. Winning the case against Karen Miller had been a hard-fought victory, one that came with its share of scars, both visible and invisible. The fence still stood tall at the edge of her property, a symbol not just of her determination, but also of the boundaries she had fought so fiercely to establish. Yet, as weeks turned into months, life in Willow Creek began to settle into a new rhythm, one defined less by conflict and more by cautious reconciliation. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to retreat from the spotlight she had once dominated. After the humiliating courtroom defeat and the public fallout from her failed campaign, she became something of a ghost in the neighborhood. She stopped attending HOA meetings altogether, leaving the board scrambling to fill her role as president. Rumors circulated that she was planning to sell her house, though no one knew for sure until moving trucks arrived one crisp autumn morning. By then, it was clear. Karen had decided to leave Willow Creek behind. Some whispered that she'd purchased a home near a state park, where official hiking trails ensured no one would dare put up a fence or challenge her authority again. Without Karen's constant meddling, tensions in the community slowly eased. Neighbors who had once hesitated to speak out against her began expressing relief that the drama was finally over. At the same time, many couldn't help but reflect on how much damage Karen's actions had caused, not just to Sarah, but to the fabric of the community itself. Friendships had been strained, trust had eroded, and the idyllic charm of Willow Creek had been tarnished, if only temporarily. For Sarah, the healing process required patience and effort. While the court ruling had vindicated her legally, rebuilding relationships took time. She made a conscious decision to reach out to her neighbors, starting small gestures like inviting them over for coffee or offering to help with yard work. These acts of kindness weren't grandiose, but they carried weight, showing that Sarah wasn't holding grudges and genuinely wanted to move forward together. One day, while pruning rose bushes along her driveway, Sarah noticed Mr. Peterson walking by with his dog, Max. He paused at the gate, looking hesitant before finally speaking. "You've got a beautiful garden here," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the flowers. "I always admired it, even during, well, you know." Sarah smiled warmly. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. That means a lot coming from you, and I hope we can all put the past behind us now." He nodded, adjusting his glasses. "It wasn't personal, Sarah. We were caught up in Karen's storm is all, but I think most folks understand now why you did what you did." Their conversation ended with a handshake and an invitation for Mr. Peterson to stop by any time for tea. It was a small moment, perhaps, but it marked the beginning of a slow thaw in the frosty dynamics that had gripped Willow Creek. Lisa Chen, too, played a pivotal role in bridging divides, Her support for Sarah had never wavered, even when others questioned her loyalty to Karen. Now, as a mediator of sorts, Lisa organized a community cleanup day focused on the public hiking trails. Dozens of residents showed up, armed with trash bags, gloves, and good intentions. Together they cleared litter, repaired damaged signs, and planted wildflowers along the path. For the first time in months, laughter echoed through the woods. Instead of arguments, Sarah joined in enthusiastically, bringing Ethan along to help. As they worked side by side with their neighbors, she felt a renewed sense of connection to the land, to the people, and to the ideals that had drawn her to Willow Creek in the first place. When Lisa handed her a bottle of water later that afternoon, she grinned and said, "See? This is what teamwork looks like." But Sarah didn't forget the lessons she'd learned. During a town hall meeting held shortly after the cleanup event, she stood up to address the crowd. Her voice was steady as she spoke about the importance of respecting boundaries, not just physical ones, but emotional and social ones as well. "We're a community because we choose to be," she said, "and part of being a good neighbor means recognizing that everyone has different needs and limits. Let's honor those differences instead of fighting them." Her words resonated deeply, earning applause from nearly everyone present. Even Tom, who rarely took anything seriously, gave her a thumbs up and muttered, "Well said." As winter approached, Sarah found herself reflecting on everything that had transpired. The ordeal with Karen had tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated, forcing her to confront fears, doubts, and insecurities she'd long buried beneath layers of resilience. But it had also strengthened her resolve, teaching her that standing up for oneself didn't mean alienating others. It meant setting healthy boundaries while remaining open to dialogue and understanding. Ethan, too, emerged from the experience with newfound maturity. Having witnessed his mother face adversity head-on, he developed a deeper appreciation for her strength and wisdom. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching snowflakes drift lazily to the ground, he broke the silence. "Mom, I'm proud of you," he said softly. "You didn't let anyone push you around even when it was hard." Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. "Life isn't always fair, kiddo, but sometimes doing the right thing is worth the fight." Years passed, and the memory of the fence controversy faded into local lore, a cautionary tale told to newcomers about the importance of respect and compromise. Sarah's property remained private, yet welcoming. She occasionally allowed certain neighbors permission to use the old trail, provided they agreed to keep it clean and follow basic guidelines. Those who crossed her land did so with gratitude, knowing they were guests rather than entitled users. In the end, the fence became more than just a barrier. It served as a reminder of what could happen when communication broke down, and what could be achieved when people chose to listen, adapt, and grow. For Sarah Thompson, it wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about proving that standing firm doesn't have to mean shutting others out. Sometimes the strongest fences are the ones that protect not only our property, but also our principles, paving the way for a brighter, more harmonious future.